Hey, good afternoon. I think it's no longer morning, but it might be morning for some folks. So good afternoon and good morning. I'm Natalie Solden with the Communications Office for the Office of Science. Welcome to the informational webinar on nuclear physics, reaching a new energy sciences workforce, as you can see on your screen. Before we begin, I have a few logistics to go over. This meeting is being recorded. You should have seen the pop-up when you joined. The recording of this meeting, along with the slides, will be posted next week to the Office of Science website. I'll drop the link into the chat in a little bit. There are closed captions available. You can click on the closed captions button to enable them. After the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. Please use the Q&A box in Zoom to ask your question. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Sorensen with the Office of Nuclear Physics.
Thank you, Natalie, and welcome everyone. I would also like to introduce some of my colleagues who are on the line here. Sharon Stevenson is one of my colleagues within the Office of Nuclear Physics. She is the point of contact for the FAIR program, and her and I very much collaborate on these two efforts. And I'd also like to introduce Michael Zarkin, who is one of our Uber experts and keeps us all in line about what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And we lean on him heavily often. So again, welcome to this webinar. There's some information displayed here on the first screen. One important thing I do want to point out is that this disclaimer, everything that I say, I hope will be correct, but if it contradicts the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement, which is available online, is the ultimate source of the information, and you should go with what's in there. The other thing I would mention is that these slides will be made available, along with, as Natalie mentioned, the recording of this webinar. So just to kick us off, I want to start off by first introducing our research, the Office of Nuclear Physics, and our mission. So this sort of organizes, a lot of what we're doing, and is something that you can all think about when thinking about how to integrate with these opportunities. The big questions that we try to answer through our research, we try to use the atomic nucleus, which is, by the way, one of the densest objects the densest object that humans can put their hands on, to answer big questions like, why is there more matter in the universe than antimatter? What forms of matter existed in the very early, the very hot and dense early universe? How did nearly massless quarks and gluons come together to create the massive protons and neutrons that make up the visible matter, most of the visible matter in our universe? And how can nuclear data and accelerator or detector technology be improved to benefit society as a whole? Our research is organized in three broad categories: quantum chromodynamics, nuclear structure and nuclear astro, and fundamental symmetries. Sharon Stevenson is the program manager for nuclear structure and nuclear astro. I'm the program manager for fundamental symmetries. There are a total of 6 programs, and you might want to become familiar with who the various program managers are for those programs as you're working towards getting involved in those, and you can find that on our website. So who are we and what do we do? Nuclear physics through DOE supports a huge fraction of the research done in nuclear physics. The community that we support is made up of roughly 3,000 researchers at various positions and levels of advancements through their research careers. We also make use of 4 user facilities. Those are listed there on the top: ATLAS at Argonne National Lab, FRIB at MSU, and RIC, which is going to become the Electron Ion Collider at Brookhaven National Lab, and the Electron CBAF Accelerator at Thomas Jefferson National Lab. Those are of varying sizes. Some of them, have up to sort of 2,000-ish users or so, and are organized through, potentially very large collaborations, 500 people, There are also a lot of smaller efforts which are housed at university laboratories around the country, and those are shown there on this slide. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved with the research and different formats that one can look at. So we steward the workforce that is focused on this research. As I mentioned before, everything that we do is focused on research. But one of the problems, the persistent problems in our field, is underrepresentation. There's been very little improvement in the last decades. It's a status which we find, I'll say it, intolerable to our community, that we continue to have this level of underrepresentation. And just as a point of reference, we supported graduate students who went on to get their PhDs, 558 of them in the last 5 years. Of those graduate students receiving their PhDs, 16 were Black or African-American students. That's 2.9%. And as you can see, that's at least a factor of 4 underneath representation across the country. The number of students of Hispanic or Latino background who received PhDs was 18. That's 3.2%. And that is also a factor of roughly 6 below representation in the general population. This has to change because we can't remain competitive if we are not drawing the best and brightest into our workforce going forward as the world becomes more competitive. So in 2020, we started thinking about ways to improve this, and we released a funding opportunity announcement for a traineeship program, which has evolved to some extent into a much larger SC-wide program. So nuclear physics is now becoming integrated with what is called Renew, which is an SC-wide program. That traineeship program has evolved with time. We had a lot of interest from the community, and all those who may be online who participated in this, I want to congratulate you. I think the enthusiasm from our community and the very good plans and proposals that people put forward really influenced the direction of the Renew program in a very positive way. 27 awards were made, and all of those PIs who plan to renew will be folded into the Renew program, the SC-wide program, as time goes forward. It was important to us that in that program, there was a very strong engagement with MSI faculty and students. Although some of the awards went through, for example, national labs and R1 institutions, when you looked at the budgets, approximately 70% of all funds that were put out in that traineeship program went to either directly to MSIs or to MSI faculty or to MSI students. So that's based on a very careful reading of budgets. So we thought that was important because we need engagement from the faculty at the MSIs in order to execute the mentorship plans that are deemed most probable to lead to successful retention of students. A big picture, of what we wanted to do in this traineeship program involved year-round mentorship, which maintained contact with students throughout the academic year and allowed them to receive financial support while they were working on their research. Evaluations of surveys from that initial traineeship pilot have been quite positive, and the success rate so far looks good. We hope it can get better, but so far for the participants who were seniors in the first year of our program, 50% of them have now gone on and gone into graduate school. So based on all this, these extended duration research traineeships emphasizing engagement with emerging research institutions and faculty at emerging research institutions have very much been folded into what is the Renew program. In P, we've been kind of thinking through what the next step is to do. And so we're focusing in this FOA, the FY23 FOA that you're here to hear about, on broadening our concept of what we want to do within Renew. And we're broadening in sort of 3 different directions. One is we want to increase the entry points beyond what we envisioned in the original pilot traineeship program. And for example, we no longer require that the trainees are undergraduates in this FOA. We also want to bolster retention activities, because as time goes by, it's going to be more important. The question of retaining the students who have gone through this traineeship are going to become more and more important. And we're very excited also about research capacity at MSIs and supporting an increase in that capacity through various mechanisms, including teaching buyouts, different sort of partnering arrangements and opportunities for MSI faculty to get involved so that the research is actually happening at the institutions where the students are coming from. We think that that will really enhance the effectiveness of the program. So reaching a new energy sciences workforce is now Renew. In 2022, INPE participated in Renew by making an additional 17 awards under the traineeship FOA that we released before, and supporting them with the $3 million, which was budgeted for nuclear physics to participate in that program. In FY23, this program is growing, and we are going to have a budget of $6 million for the efforts that we will support this year. So again, I'm going to turn this over soon to my colleague Sharon, who's going to go through the remaining slides. But just as a reminder, our vision for Renew, the INPE Renew FOA, is to build on the traineeship program to increase entry points, to support retention through graduate student supplements and award for retention-related activities, and increase research capacities at MSIs through support for research teaching postdocs who could be located at an MSI through potential teaching buyouts or faculty expansion positions, and potential joint research endeavors that you may propose to us. And so with that, I will mention one other thing, and that is that INPE Renew for this round of the Renew program has its own FOA, and the requirements and focus of that FOA are sort of limited to the INPE Renew FOA, and don't necessarily apply to other offices and their funding opportunity announcements. So you should very much pay attention to, if you end up applying to another office, the requirements that they have in their FOA. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Paul. And as we go through the slides, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Paul? I will emphasize what Paul just said about the fact that this year, each office has its own Renew funding opportunity announcement. In contrast to FAIR, which I am going to talk a little bit more about the differences between those two funding opportunity announcements, all of the SC offices are underneath one FAIR funding opportunity announcement. So keep that in mind as we go through and look at sort of the differences between those two funding opportunity announcements. So Paul did a great job of describing how this particular funding opportunity announcement, and I'm going to say FOA, that just so you can, this is what the feds say. We don't even say FOA, we say FOA. And so this particular FOA has a number of initiatives built into it that are, some of them are uniquely INPE's in terms of nuclear physics initiatives here. And the first one is to build on this INPE traineeship program, which has been, we think, very successful over the past 2 years. And so this is what we call an entry point initiative, and that is the student traineeship part of it, undergraduate and graduate, extended duration, summer full-time, which is very familiar to most of the academics on this call, and academic year part-time research training. And that is different than some other funding mechanisms throughout the federal sector. An emphasis on team-based mentoring. We had that before 2 years ago when we had our pilot program, and we're continuing that because we know it's important and we know it works. So to kind of step through this, you will have, of course, access to all of these But please read carefully both these slides. These slides are really just capturing the language that is already in the FOA for Renew. So next slide, please, Paul. So this is about how we can request supplements. So a few of the people on this call I already know, because they said they were attending on this webinar, said that they already have an award through our Renew last year, fiscal year 22, or one of our traineeship programs, and they would like to continue. And so you can request funding for that. You can also request funding, this is new, to support graduate students. This is a new part of it. So new awards or supplements. And if you're unclear about what a supplement is, it is attached to an existing award. Those can be requested for former trainees or current trainees to continue graduate level research. We really encourage you to reach out to me, to reach out to Paul if you have a question about this, even if your research area might be in a part of our portfolio that's not overseen by either of us. So example, if it's in heavy ion physics, we still recommend that you reach out to us in terms of the logistics for this particular funding mechanism. Other proposals are what we call a retention initiative. Both of these are retention initiatives. And so we want creative, we want community-based proposals, 1 to 5 years. And these are pretty much wide open. That's what this second bullet is really describing. High potential for improving retention, along with associated metrics for gauging the success. I think that if I can go ahead, we're not supposed to coach anyone on how to write a proposal, but I will say, I think we all know that without associated metrics for gauging success in these kinds of efforts, it's going to be difficult for us to see where the success falls, relatively speaking. And also, questions and comments about any of these aspects are welcome. You can just put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to all of them in this webinar. Next slide, please, Paul. And then expanding research capacity, we have a couple. Again, these are new in terms of they weren't in the last Renew. So we are looking at these postdocs, and what we mean here are research investment initiatives, 2 to 3 years, because that's typically how long a postdoc usually works with a particular group, up to 50% more research time for the faculty member at an HBCU or an MSI. And that is delivered through a postdoc that is on campus and doing some teaching and some research there. Be aware that we probably should have put that sentence there about teaching time must be covered from other sources. That is something that is pretty much non-negotiable for us. So it would be something that you would need to work in concert with your academic institution to make sure they're on board for that part of it. The second bullet here about research faculty expansion, this is up to 5 years of faculty support at a 50% level or 75% level for a new faculty hire, either in a VAP position, a visiting assistant professor position, with the hope of perhaps a permanent position at the HBCU or the MSI. This is an opportunity to grow a department in terms of research capability. So in some ways, this is a little bit like the FAIR initiative, but yet it's focused on workforce development. And so we felt like it was appropriate here in Renew. So we're going past undergraduate only traineeships and broadening the scope. And then next slide, please. We have another one. Yes, these joint endeavors. These are opportunities for a limited duration in terms of time, but a two-way exchange of researchers and staff between an HBCU MSI and another institution. And this is to establish like a research conduit between the two. And so you see how open-ended some of these bullets are, may include joint faculty positions. The point here is, again, to use creativity, to work with the cultures of both institutions to see what they're comfortable doing, and to try to work something out so that we can have these types of relationships that benefit all parties, and encourage more research at the MSI and the HBCU. None of these examples, I'll pause here for a second and say, none of these examples are intended to be restrictive. So if you have an idea that doesn't fall into any of these areas or these buckets, don't let that dissuade you. We encourage you to send a pre-application or not. If you're unable to reach the deadline in time, submit a full proposal. While I'm talking about pre-applications for a second, you'll see that for our program, they are not required, but especially if you have a new proposal that you are considering, we recommend it. It's a fairly short application process, and you can get feedback pretty quickly in terms of being encouraged to submit a full proposal. So next slide, please, Paul. And thank you for running the slides. You're welcome. So a little bit about FAIR, because both of these FOAs are out at the same time, and there has already been some questions about how these two will work in concert together. We encourage them to work in concert together. We've had some questions already. We've even had, and I'm curious to see if the same questions will come up here. And we've already had a lot of discussion with people who are interested in perhaps applying to both. The large picture here is that FAIR is very much focused on research capacity, and it's, I think, more faculty centered, where Renew is just broader. At least for MP, it's much broader, focuses on undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, faculty. You know, it has a kind of a bigger base to work from. For those of you unfamiliar with FAIR, I'll just briefly say that this is an opportunity where the expected funding level is between $300,000 and $750,000 over a 3-year period. But it has some interesting boundary conditions, as we like to say in physics. And that is that you will have one PI, and in each PI can only submit one, where Renew, you can submit, a PI can submit many to the Renew FOA. But that lead institution, and the lead institution must be a non-R1 MSI or an emerging research institution. That lead institution will have the majority of the funding. They will partner with either an R1 MSI, a SC user facility, or one of our DOE national labs. 15 to 25% of the funding will go to that second institution. Majority funds go to the lead PI. So a very different flavor, if you will, of funding. It's specific, and yet we're extremely interested in having a large MP response to this, because I think we hope that there is a lot of potential growth across the country for us with this particular effort. Note the webpage down there at the bottom. As Paul mentioned, I'm the point of contact for FAIR. He's the point of contact for Renew. We go back and forth. We talk almost every day. Some of you who have been working with us for the traineeships may remember Kelsey Crafton, our AAAS fellow, who was very, very active in both of these funding opportunity announcements as they were brought on board. She's no longer with the office, but you do have me and you do have Paul, and we'll do the best we can. Next slide, please. So here is some more information about the synergies between these two efforts. And I really appreciate this slide, which Paul came up with. Thank you, Paul, about how to maybe gauge which one you should submit to. Besides what I said earlier about FAIR being more research capacity at the home institution and a little bit, I think, more faculty centric. And we will, I think it's very important to note, if you are talking about synergies and if you are applying to both, keep in mind the audience for the reviewers here. It is going to be both sets of proposals will be reviewed by the same panel. Therefore, you can talk about the other proposal that you might submit, knowing that the reviewers will have access to all of that information. So next slide, please, Paul. Here's some scenarios that we can look at where it's even suggested that you can use the same narrative and just use different budget sheets, and especially the budget justification. We really like a detailed budget justification. We really do. And I say we, I think everyone at the Office of Science appreciates details in a budget justification, even if they were also in the narrative. We would love to have you repeat that information. It's extremely helpful for us in figuring out the demarcation lines between funding. But you are also free to do that. We are trying to make it as easy as possible for you to submit proposals that will be successful. And this is one of those ways that we're trying to do so. Another thing you can do at any step in the process is reach out to either of us or send an email to both of us and see which one answers you first. And we welcome your questions from now all the way up until the proposals are submitted. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit of technical details here about the difference between a single PI, and this is for Renew, because FAIR's a bit different here. I told you FAIR, you have a single PI and you have a single collaborative institution. So it's a one-on-one. With Renew, you can have teams. And the difference, there are a couple of different differences that are listed here. I want to bring up one more that's not maybe listed here directly, and it's about subawards. So one scenario is that in the subaward scenario is that we have a team. One PI or university group says, we will be the lead. Maybe they do the majority of the writing. Maybe they're getting the majority of the funding. But for whatever reason, they self-identify as the lead. Subawards are then given to other PIs and other institutions. That has worked within the Office of Science for forever. One thing it doesn't do for MSIs and HBCUs in particular is in our reporting system, this subaward model here on the right would only be listed with one PI. So if you are tenure track, for example, and you're going up for tenure, then you will have to explain why on the website, this DOE, Office of Science MP Award, lists someone else, and it doesn't list you and your institution officially. From our viewpoint, from the federal viewpoint, this does not matter. Funds are still going to your institution, but it might matter for you personally in terms of promotion, tenure, annual reviews, all of these things. The other mechanism then is to do a collaborative application. Everyone has the same application, I mean, in terms of narrative. What's different is each institution submits their own unique budget and budget justification. If an award is made, it's listed in the federal record as an award and the dollar amount to your institution. So the information from subawards is a little bit hidden in the way the federal reporting is done. And you may want to be mindful of that. Some deans and university presidents and departments understand subawards and they get it, some don't. And so it's maybe worth a conversation when you are considering how to put the award together. The other part of this is what's easier for you. If you're at an HBCU or an MSI that has a really small or non-existent grants office, then it may be really difficult to have them push the button to get this proposal submitted for you. And it may just add a lot of extra time and heartburn and heartache. So it may be better for you to go in the subaward route if the lead PI, if it's all being streamlined through one institution, all the budget information is going through one set of review. Again, we're happy to talk with you about this more. And I kind of went, I went off there. Thank you, Paul. Next slide, please. And see, we're almost done. So where to find more information? This is a lot. These are all live links. We even have a frequently asked questions page. We have both information about Renew and the FAIR initiative online, and both funding opportunity announcements that you now know are called FOAs. Those are also available online for you to go through and read. And of course, you can also get more information from the two of us here on the call, me or Paul. So with that, I think we'll pivot away to some questions.
Great. We have a couple, and I'll just read them for Sharon and Paul to answer. Can previous awards be expanded with same or new scope? This would allow to maintain established partnerships, marketing without starting new awards. That's a question. Would this allow to maintain established partnerships, marketing without starting new awards? If yes, is there an expected limit on the cost for this expansion?
Yes, is the answer.
To both.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in before you, Paul. The estimated amount of funding, that's a good question. If you look at the FOA, the language is that we have what we call a floor and a ceiling. The floor is $10,000. And that's for one of the early initiatives that's more about send us a great creative idea. Typically the awards we would imagine would be larger than that. Estimated, I think average about $300,000 over 3 years, and with a ceiling of $500,000, so $500,000. Paul, do you want to add?
Nope, that was it. Yes to both.
Great. Is there a limit on how many proposals a PI may submit as long as they are different and the workforce is adequate to do them?
There is no limit through Renew, but Sharon can comment about FAIR.
Thank you, Paul. There is a limit on FAIR, one proposal. So the PI can submit one. So it's a pretty, that is a striking difference between the two. Also, if you are someone who sits at the intersection, we often have people who sit at the intersection between high energy physics, for example, and nuclear physics. We have no restrictions on our Renew FOA, they might. So don't assume that you can submit multiple submissions to them. You would need to check that FOA.
Speaking of FAIR, if the FAIR solicitation is used to leverage a Renew proposal, should mention of both Renew and FAIR be referenced in both proposals?
Yes, and I hope the slides are pretty clear on that. And remember, it's the same panel reviewing both. So the reviewers will understand what's going on because you'll be speaking in both proposals about that coordinated effort.
And then can Renew support international, an international component as long as it benefits diversifying the US workforce?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There are no restrictions on the Renew participants. You know, as you can see, we've put a whole bunch of flexibility into our NP Renew FOA. And the way that we handle that is we then review them under criteria about, you know, how well they advance the goals of the funding opportunity announcement. And that actually becomes quite restrictive, right? If you start proposing things that are not in line with what we're trying to accomplish, then you will run into trouble in the review process. But otherwise, you know, that is okay, particularly if, you know, if it's going to enhance the value of the program. I see Michael unmuted as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. There's one slight wrinkle to be mindful of, and this is not really a problem, but more something to keep in mind as you're designing a Renew initiative. If you are planning to bring non-US students to a DOE national lab or any DOE site or facility, they will have to go through an approval and clearance process, exactly the same as any other non-US citizen visitor to a government site. Sometimes that goes very quickly, sometimes it takes time, and the details are absolutely opaque to all of us in the programs. But I would keep that in mind, that if you're planning to bring students to a DOE national lab, they may not be able to show up unannounced. So please work with your DOE lab partners if you're planning that kind of an activity.
And one other additional point of reference is through the first 2 years of the NP traineeship, through the prior FOA, 88% of the student participants were US citizens. We're happy with that number. It means it wasn't 100%. So obviously, you know, international students are allowed. But, you know, if your program was exclusively international, we feel as program managers that wouldn't be advancing the goals that we're pursuing through this program.
Are mixed mechanisms possible, collaborative and with some sub-awards?
Michael.
Absolutely. You tell me what's going to fit best for the teams of institutions proposing the work that you're going to do. As Sharon ably noted, there is going to be a difference in that sub-awards are not listed as unique independent awards, whereas collaboratives are, and that sometimes matters for tenure committees. From a scientific and technical perspective, it doesn't matter so much unless on a given award something really were to go sideways and we needed to poke somebody's belly button to solve a scientific problem. Of course, that's never going to happen, so let's not worry about that. There is nothing wrong with having collaborators submitting collaboratively, of which one or two might need subs. It's really driven by the nature of the relationship between the scientists and the institutions. If you're forming more of a flat peer level network, that sounds like the definition of a collaborative approach. If, however, somebody is really leading the effort and in a position to provide command, control, direction, guidance, and tell you, this is what you're doing this week, that sounds like the relationship between a prime and a sub. There's nothing wrong with blending the two, but I would think you would want to be careful in writing your proposal about what model fits your team and how you're going to work together.
Thanks, Mike. You mentioned that phase 2 traineeships could apply to fiscal year 2024. Will those projects also start in September 2024?
Roughly, kind of, somewhat. In general, we would expect renewals to start as soon after the end of the currently supported project as is feasible. That might be September 1st. That might be August 15th. It could be September 15th. We're going to be negotiable to make sure that we don't leave students stranded or cause any heartburn or hardship.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, our plan, when we did the first round of traineeships, we struggled really hard to make sure that everybody got their funds in time for the summer program. We did not always succeed. That was one of the challenges that early PIs identified. And so the model that we're moving to now within nuclear physics is to try to get all of the awards lined up so that they start September 1st. That way, if you want to support students for this summer, we're not going to be able to do that. You know, we won't be able to have the time to process these, get them reviewed, and make the awards in a way that we could have confidence that we would be able to get the funds to you in time to support the students this summer. So, you know, the idea is that your award would start September 1st, and any funding that would be used for summer support would be for the following summer. That's the plan. If you have problems in terms of like fitting together a renew and making a renewal proposal from the prior years, contact Sharon and I. We will discuss it with you and make sure that your program is not hindered in any way by you know, the processes that we have to put in place.
Great. The next question I have is pretty specific, so you might want to answer it here or through email later, but I'll ask it. As a PI at an HBCU with a regular DOE grant, can I still propose renew or fair? That's the first part of that question, and I see nodding.
Yeah.
Yes.
The answer to that one is yes.
Great.
However, I would be very mindful that the government, regardless of which agency or agencies you're proposing to, has a strict prohibition against paying for the same amount of work twice. That tends to attract the attention of our offices of the Inspector General and be generally unpleasant both for us and for you. So please don't try to double dip.
The specific part is in the last renewal proposal, I included a request for partial 25% release time teaching buyout. Would such support better be covered under renew? How do the renew and fair office work with the other SC offices?
I'm not sure I fully understand the last part of that question. But, you know, the first one, I mean, it depends on, you know, you can propose an idea. It's going to be evaluated by our reviewers based on, you know, whether it's going to help increase research capacity at MSI, whether it's going to help broaden and diversify our community. And I think that's, you know, that's the guiding principle. So it's it is possible to submit that idea to the FOA. Sharon, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that there is no renew office or fair office in this model. I can understand why you might think there would be, but we are sort of just that we are the points of contact within the MP office, but we are working with all of the other program managers. So for this, this PI mentioned medium energy. So we would work with Spiros and Gulshan, for example, to find out, you know, about the overlap and the work, the proposed work and scope and things like that. And also, of course, being mindful to the point that Mike brought up that we have to make sure that we're not, as he said, double dipping.
Great, thank you. Is the focus of Renew call on community colleges or 4-year and beyond institutions?
All of it, both. We have a couple of current awards to community colleges. We realize that in terms of underrepresented in the nuclear physics portfolio, community colleges are very underrepresented, and we would like to change that. But we know that that really does depend on the faculty who are there and their interest in nuclear physics. So thank you, Kathleen, for that question. We did not mention it in our slides, and that's an oversight on our part. We we encourage community colleges also to be part of this effort.
I would add one thing that has sort of been in the back of my mind as well, and I tried to sort of foreshadow this with the introduction about research. Everything that we support does need to be framed in terms of research that's going to happen, and workforce development to accomplish the research. So there have been times when sort of curriculum-based activities were put in budgets, and those have to be removed because we don't support those kinds of activities. So
Oh, sorry, Natalie, just to, some of the people on this call may be more NSF familiar, where those kinds of efforts are appropriate and even sometimes expected. And our mission statement is different. And so we're focusing on workforce development for research and for working in STEM fields, which is a bit of a different flavor than educating the workforce. There's some lines of demarcation there that need to be considered. And we're happy to talk with you more about what that might look like, and what we would say, okay, yes, this is appropriate and this is not. Training is appropriate. So if you are training students to work in nuclear physics and you are working with them over the summer in what might look like a summer school class kind of setting, because it's the most efficient way to train the students, yes. If you are creating a new class during the academic year and you want us to buy all of your lab equipment, that's a harder sell, if that makes, so do talk to us about it.
So it looks like we've reached the end of the questions that I've received. I usually like to give people another minute to drop in any last questions before we end. So I'll do that now.
And while we wait, I just want to say thank you for joining the webinar. Super happy to have you here and listening in.
On a Friday afternoon, no less.
Mm-hmm.
The 6 million is just for NP renew.
That's correct.
That is correct.
Renew across the Office of Science is round about 50-odd million, I think. So if your proposal isn't squarely aligned with NP, please do look at the other Renew FOAs.
And larger scale experimental collaborations request funding for DEI initiatives, climate surveys, mentorship programs, workshops, etc.
Absolutely. I encourage that. The only thing that I can imagine that doesn't make sense is, if your department or something like that wants to do these things, I don't think that that's an appropriate thing to submit to us. But if you are a large collaboration, like the STAR collaboration, the Phoenix collaboration, the Atlas, ALICE, whatever it is, and as part of your research, you want to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion among that, within that collaboration, I think us as the supporters of that research would be the appropriate place to ask for that support.
Okay, thank you. Next question, if we were to propose a Renew program partnering with colleagues in our department whose research falls within other DOE offices, for example, basic energy sciences, could we do this by sending a joint or separate proposal to each FOA?
For this year, you would be better served by sending separate proposals to both NP and BES or any other programs that are appropriate for the scope of work you're proposing. Note that answer is very carefully limited to this year's competition. There is a decent chance that next year's Renew solicitation will be written more broadly to encompass more of the Office of Science to facilitate some cross-program, cross-cutting initiatives. However, that's at this point a theoretical likelihood. That solicitation for the future has not yet been written and has not been issued. So I would stick that in the back of your mind as an interesting idea to keep in mind for the future. But for right now, each program office has its own FOA, which means you need to apply to each appropriate FOA separately. It would probably behoove you, if you're planning to do that, to carefully delimit the scope of each activity within those proposals so that the NP reviewers know that they're working in this swim lane of work, and that the BES reviewers would see that they're focusing on this swim lane. But if you were to invest the effort in breaking an integrated initiative into those more discrete program-related chunks, that seems a very appropriate way to maximize your opportunities. And I hope I didn't say anything that my program colleagues will then slap me for.
No, absolutely not. The only thing I would add is you are encouraged to reach out to us in these situations. You know, it is entirely possible for us to jointly fund, individual awards through multiple offices. We have done this with high energy physics in the past on several of the traineeships, but that requires coordination across the offices. And the more time we have to discuss that possibility in advance, the more likely it is that we would be able to come to some arrangement where that would be possible. So it's more information on our side is better, and also for the reviewers. So as Mike was saying, please be clear in your proposal about exactly what is happening.
And again, we've reached the end of the questions. So I will give another 30 seconds as we're wrapping up. If there's anything Sharon, Paul, or Mike you'd like to say before we wrap up.
Just thank everyone again. Thank you all. And thank you, Natalie.
Sure.
Yep. Thank you, Natalie.
And Adrian, who's there behind the scenes. And of course, Mike, always a pleasure to have you with us.
I dropped
Enjoy your weekend.
I dropped in the chat again. The recording and slides will be available next week on the website and where you can find those. And that is it for today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Bye
Have a
all.
good weekend, everybody.